Welcome back. Now that you've gotten through your first tragic play by Euripides, we now turn to the big massive trilogy by Aeschylus, the one called the Oresteia. I want to make very clear so that you are not confused about this, especially on your final exam. The name Oresteia is not the name of a play. That's a common mistake that students make. Oresteia is the name of the trilogy that includes all three plays, which are Agamemnon, which was in your textbook, Libation Bearers, unfortunately not in your textbook, but summarized for you, and then Eumenides, the third play. So make sure that you understand that Oresteia, when I refer to it, is the compilation of all three plays together, not one of the individual plays. When you're talking about an individual play, you should be saying Agamemnon, Libation Bearers, Eumenides. Be very careful about that when you're studying Aeschylus. Okay, I'll come to the Oresteia in a little bit, but let's first of all talk about Aeschylus himself, the playwright. Let's please pause for a moment. Go to Sakai Resources and please pull up handout number 2 on Aeschylus. Please pause your video, go to Sakai, and open handout number 2. Are you ready? Okay, if you have your handout open, we may now proceed. Aeschylus is chronologically the first of the three playwrights, but here in this book he is presented second. He's quite a bit earlier than Euripides. Euripides, remember, was born in 485 BC. Aeschylus is born in 525 BC. We have that better recorded than we have for Euripides because we have a stone from the island of Paros. It's given to you at the end of chapter 3 in your Dowden textbook. You should probably check that out at some point. Look at the end of chapter 3 of the textbook by Ken Dowden in order to find the list of dates that are provided by the Parian marble, it's called. So this marble slab from Paros gives us events and dates, and although we don't necessarily trust all of them, we're pretty sure on other grounds that the date given for Aeschylus, 525 or 524 BC, works out fine. So he appears to have been a military patriot par excellence because he definitely participated in the big battle of Marathon, which occurred in 490 BC and which we're going to talk about in the next video related to the Persian Wars. He also possibly participated in the Battle of Salamis that happened in 480 BC. His epitaph describes only his military successes and mentions nothing at all about his successes as a tragic playwright, despite the fact that he had a family of playwrights after him, sons and nephews who also wrote and themselves also were fairly successful, although we don't have plays of theirs surviving. So Aeschylus eventually left Athens to go out to Sicily and appears to have written plays in Syracuse for the tyrant named Hero. He died out there in 456 BC, 2 years after the production of Oresteia in 458 BC. There is the funny story that actually made its way into a TV police drama about how he was sitting out sunning himself one day. Apparently he had a bald head, and some eagle came along and dropped a tortoise on top of his head, thinking that it was a rock to try to bust open the shell of the tortoise, and that was supposedly how it died. We're not sure that that actually happened, but that is the funny apocryphal story that is told about his death. In any event, his works are detailed for you on the first 2 pages of the handout, and I will list for you the works that survived on the first page. So at the beginning of the first page for Roman numeral 2, first of all, you should find suppliants, you should find Persians, you should find 7 Against Thebes, and you should find Oresteia, which is the whole trilogy. I'll repeat those. Suppliants, 7 Against Thebes, Persians, Oresteia. And then if you turn the page, you will come to Prometheus Bound, which is the 7th play that's ascribed to Aeschylus. Unfortunately, it has been questioned by scholars that possibly it was not actually his original play, that it might have been a play by one of his sons or somebody else in the family and might have been mistakenly ascribed to him. So although we have that as his 7th play, we're not exactly sure if that's actually accurate. The reason, by the way, why we have only 7 plays of Aeschylus surviving, as opposed to quite a few more by Euripides, is a historical accident. There were a group of anthologists in the AD centuries that went through Greek literature and tended to cut away pieces of literature that they didn't think were worth keeping. And they selected only 7 plays of Aeschylus and only 7 plays of Sophocles to survive, and everything else was discarded. They selected 10 plays of Euripides. However, 9 more escaped the rubbish heap and survived to us. So we actually have 19 plays of Euripides, which is rather interesting for us because we have examples of some really great plays of a playwright as well as some not so great plays of a playwright. But in the case of Aeschylus, we have only these 7 plays surviving, and as it turns out, maybe one of them that was chosen by the ancient playwrights might not actually have been his to begin with. Okay, so the way Aeschylus presents a play is markedly different from the way that Euripides does. Aeschylus is much more on the stage presentation than he is about the story. He is very stately in the way that he makes the plot move forward. It's quite slow-moving, very majestic, very courtly in the way that it goes across. And everybody is markedly polite in talking to each other, you'll notice. There are times that you can get some pretty violent rhetoric, as you definitely do in Eumenides. But for the most part, the play moves forward very slowly, sometimes even stodgily, without a great deal of action or interaction among the characters, or even among the chorus and the characters. There are reasons why the trilogy you read, Aristea, is actually a markedly late trilogy by Aeschylus, as opposed to some of his other earlier plays. I'll describe those in a bit when we come to the Aristea. But for the most part, Aeschylus, as I say, makes the event of watching his play a profoundly religious experience. And in that sense, maybe comes the closest to performing the catharsis that is associated with Aristotle's theory of tragedy. It does mean, therefore, that it takes quite a bit of effort to read his plays and even to understand sometimes what exactly is happening. But if you can make your way through and be very patient with it, it's in fact a profound experience when you've come to understand the full effect of the tragedy that has been suffered. Because his language is so elevated, and because he puts a lot of emphasis on the gods and heroes and great characters like the kings, for instance, the style given to him is high by the later scholars. High means epic, which means that now gods are in control and fate is in control. Humans have very little effect on the outcome of the tragedy. In fact, in many cases, the tragedy has already been finished by the time that the play actually opens, so that there is very little that the humans can really do except just suffer the process of seeing the tragedy unfold before them while they remain completely helpless to do anything about it. So gods and fates determine everything, essentially, in an Aeschylean tragedy. Humans can sometimes have effects on how things come about, but there isn't really a sense that the humans do much to determine the way that the tragedy actually itself unfolds. As such, that means that when Aeschylus presents any character on stage, the character is typically, certainly can be driven by passion and can be driven by very strong motivation. But the sense you, again, have with a lot of these characters is that it's already been mechanized somehow. So by the time Clytemnestra appears on stage at the very beginning of Agamemnon, you get a sense that the entire plot to kill Agamemnon is already there. Agamemnon shows up and he just makes his way on the red carpet, probably knowing that he's walking into his doom, because he already was complaining about the fact that he was walking on the red carpet to begin with, that was an impious act, probably was. Cassandra equally walks in, just accepts her fate without much complaint. And when you get to the Eumenides, you get a sense that Orestes just simply goes through the motions. He's a suppliant, then he makes his way over to Athens. Apollo and Athena argue everything over. The Furies are there. They are indeed quite pretty powerful and pretty scary. That's what makes the Eumenides an especially impressive play to read. But again, the whole thing feels like it's somehow all rigged in a way. And then, of course, Athena at the end will provide the new identity for the Furies. And they, too, despite their original anger at being denied the prize of Orestes, on behalf of his mother Clytemnestra, finally just simply slot their way into their new role. So everything just feels like there's a big hand manipulating everything. So you might wonder, why can this possibly be a great tragedy? Well, it's precisely this fact that actually makes it profound, because what Aeschylus is probably trying to illustrate in this very profound experience is exactly how much humans in Athens and other polis must recognize the power of things outside and gods and concepts outside their control. Polis had an unfortunate tendency, especially the governments, to think that if they just simply carried out certain acts, like, say, invading nearby polis, that they could control everything and make everything work out well for them. It took tragedians and sometimes comic playwrights to tap them on the shoulder and say, wait a minute, not so fast. There are gods. Gods really control everything. We simply have to go along with what the gods tell us. Fate is there to show us the way. We have to take that way. We do not do well to try to obstruct or redirect or ignore fate. So when you see the way that everybody struggles with the whole process of tragedy in an Aeschylean play, you realize, admittedly after panting your way through reading the play, that it's really an amazing intellectual experience to go through it. In fact, one of the basic concepts behind an Aeschylean play is given right near the beginning of Agamemnon in the chorus, called Pathe Mathos, which means learning by way of suffering. So really for Aeschylus, the occurrences of the tragedy are probably less an area of interest in him than what both the characters within the tragedy and the viewing audience can learn from it. So it's much more of a teaching experience than a real dramatic experience in that sense. But the drama is still there. It just carries itself out in a much slower and again, much more statesman-like way than what we will get used to with the Sophoclean or Euripidean tragedy. So let me now conclude here by speaking about Aristeia, our trilogy. Aristeia is really an astounding piece of work. And it's one that I hope will be memorable for you for many times afterwards. And as I mentioned, Aristeia, maybe to our good fortune, is in fact the last surviving work of Aeschylus. So it has a lot of the later characteristics of tragedy that make it a much more interesting one than some of his earlier works that lack some of those helpful elements. So you start off remarkably with the Watchman. We have Aeschylus, who is known for trying to commemorate mainly the exploits of gods, kings, heroes, and such. And yet he starts off with this very humble watchman out in the dark and the cold, watching for a fire. He's probably been watching for many, 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 many days, and he's probably sick of it. But all of a sudden, the fire appears, and he runs downstairs to inform the palace that he has seen the signal fire that informs him that Agamemnon is on his way home because the Trojan War has been concluded. So the play, of course, is set in Mycenae, but cleverly Aeschylus calls the city Argos, which is the, for him, modern city, not the already ancient lost city. And it's quite important to understand that it's Argos and not Mycenae that Aeschylus uses as the setting for this particular play, because there was a lot of political back and forth among all these polis, including Argos, which was right at the center of quite a lot of it. Okay, so we then see the chorus coming on stage, pleased at the news of the reporting of the end of the Trojan War, but very concerned. They are aware of what went on with the sacrifice of Iphigenia. They suspect trouble with Clytemnestra. And to make it worse, there was a particular omen that was very disturbing about showing a bird of prey that grabbed onto a rabbit that had a brood, and that Artemis was very unhappy with it because in addition to the dog, the rabbit or the hare was also a symbolic animal for Artemis. So she's angry. And she's angry, of course, at Agamemnon because he didn't sacrifice to her one time when he killed a stag. And she opposes the Trojan War. So there's a lot of stuff stacked up against Agamemnon, and the chorus, despite their likely celebratory mood about the signal fire saying that Agamemnon's coming home, is now full of apprehension because they know that this is going to be the first time that Agamemnon and Clytemnestra have actually seen each other since all of these very unfavorable events have happened. So Clytemnestra gets the palace ready. Agamemnon appears with Cassandra, his trophy, right there in front of Clytemnestra. And Clytemnestra spreads out the red carpet, and Agamemnon dithers, no, this is impious. Don't make me do this. No, it's okay. You deserve it. You're the big hero. Okay, he gets on. He walks in. Clytemnestra enters the palace, then invites Cassandra in, and then turns back into the palace. Now, it's interesting to note that we've had two actors on stage. Now, Aeschylus was known for being a two-actor playwright. Probably already by the time of this play, he might have already become known as a three-actor play. However, Aeschylus also had a nasty tendency to play tricks on the audience, such as to have characters remain silent on stage for long periods. As Aristophanes tells us in Frogs, Aeschylus did with Niobe, who was the mythical woman who unfortunately lost all of her 14 children, 7 sons and 7 daughters, when she boasted to the goddess of childbirth, Latona, in the Roman version, that she had 14 more kids, 7 times as many kids as she had. Well, she only had 2 kids, but they happened to be really good archers. You don't make fun of them. So Niobe paid the price, and she was left silent on stage for almost the entire production. Apparently, that caused some murmurings in the audience, and even many years later, Aristophanes, commenting on Niobe and on Agamemnon, could make a point that this is what happened. So here's Cassandra on the chariot, left on stage, supposedly as an extra role because we've already had 2 speaking actors on stage, and then after the chorus tries to have a call to conversation with her, and thinking that maybe she can't speak Greek, all of a sudden out comes Apollo out of no place. And I have a feeling it probably startled the audience, who may not have been expecting Aeschylus to actually use a third actor. So all of a sudden, Cassandra just bursts out. She doesn't like Apollo very much. Apollo did some rather unhappy things with her. First, Apollo granted Cassandra the gift of priesthood in exchange for, guess what, a sexual favor. Cassandra then rebuffed the sexual favor. And so Apollo said, okay, fine. You'll still have your ability to prophesize. But guess what? No one will believe you. So Cassandra now speaks of torment happening inside the house. Murder, blood, all sorts of things. The chorus is baffled. What are you talking about? She's just babbling out a whole bunch of nonsense. Finally, she just settles down and walks into the palace and accepts her fate. And the chorus is still puzzled what's going on. Should they investigate? And then all of a sudden, screeches come out of the palace, and we hear first Agamemnon and then Cassandra cut down in turn by Clytemnestra and Aegisthus. The two of them then take out the 2 bodies, and they boast. Sorry about that. I got excited and I knocked your view aside. And they boast proudly of everything that they did. And the chorus is furious, but they're old men on staffs, as they're depicted at the very beginning of the play. There's nothing they can do about it, except for hope for Orestes. And remember, Electra hasn't appeared yet, but she's actually behind the scenes. So the missing play, Libation Bearers, is the depiction of the plot of Orestes, the chorus, Orestes' friend Pylades, who is silent all through the play, and Electra to bring about the vengeance against Clytemnestra. When we come back now to Eumenides, the third play, we have Orestes now a suppliant at Delphi, and the Furies who have been chasing after him on behalf of Clytemnestra are camped out all around him. And they have, however, been put to sleep by Apollo, so they can't actually touch him, and they can't anyway, even though they are vengeance goddesses, because he's on the altar, and that makes him a suppliant. So the Furies have come up from the below world. Their original name in Greek is Erinowes. You see in the title Eumenides, their eventual name. We'll get to how that comes about. So Apollo has purified Orestes, but cannot clear the charge of matricide. So for that, Orestes has to go to Athens and with Athena. Now, the trial that you see in Athens is the instrumentation of Athena, and the council is called the Areopagus Council, which was the original trial court in Athens from one of the early forms of government about 2 centuries before the Persian Wars, and therefore 2.5 centuries before the production of this play, approximately. And so this was the original Supreme Court, as it were. But a couple of years before the production of the play, this council had seen its powers taken away from it because the head statesman of Athens, Pericles, wanted to change the government around so that the populace, the demos in Greek, would be responsible for making all the decisions and also for carrying out the trials, which meant that this institution became virtually obsolete. So it's interesting to see this play come out that features this council so prominently 4 years after its powers were taken away from it. Now, in the trial, Apollo presents his case on behalf of Orestes, taking full responsibility for the murder. The Furies present their case, that they are the goddesses of vengeance and that they need to have their way. Athena will not decide the case herself, so she appoints 12 men to do it for her. That's where we get the 12-man jury. And when the verdict has to be carried out, we get 6 and 6. So there's 4, 5, 6, 4, 5, 6 on each side. When that happens, Athena casts the deciding vote in favor of Orestes for a rather interesting reason. Obviously very just. She's descended from a male only. So of course, naturally, she thinks only of the men's sides of things. The women's side obviously doesn't count. The mother's side obviously doesn't count. Very just, very objective, obviously. Okay, so Athena casts that vote. Orestes is able to leave and promises in Argos that there will be permanent peace between Athens and Argos, that they will be able to stay allied. And in fact, although Athens and Argos were not always on the same side, they sometimes were, and there never was any direct war ever between them, historically, as it turned out. So Orestes leaves. He'll eventually have a happy history for a time as king of Sparta, although his eventual fate will not, in fact, be so happy, as it turns out. But he is cleared of the charges, and that does put an end to the curse of the house of Atreus that has been belaboring this family for a few generations. Well, now what are we going to do with the Furies? They're going to run around and destroy everything because they're so angry. And so Athena convinces them to stay in Athens now and become the Eumenides, the kindly ones, as the protectress goddesses of the city of Athens. And although they're kind of reluctant to be treated this way, they do in fact finally agree. They submit, and that is the way that the story ends. So you have the old-style justice seen with the Furies giving way to the modern justice imposed by Athena and Athens. And although Athena is a goddess, she has enough masculinity in it that we can still see that same civilizing effect. We have the old women goddesses being replaced by essentially a male-oriented society with its new form of justice based on law and a jury of one's peers rather than the old eye for an eye. And notice how we start in a period of darkness with the watchman, the single figure, and we gradually emerge through the light until we finally come into the brilliant glow of Athenian society at the very end. One way to understand this, if you have ever seen Walt Disney's original Fantasia, check out the very last piece, which has Mussorgsky's pictures in the exhibition. You have the whole tumult with the double with the Mussorgsky piece, but then you end with that very slow, gentle Ave Maria. If you can watch that and see how that plays out, that's in a way kind of like the way that this trilogy passes. I hope you appreciated this tragedy and trilogy, even if it was not very easy reading. And also, I congratulate you for getting through now your 3rd week of the course. So next week we turn to the final of the playwrights we need to cover, and that is Sophocles. And let me finally remind you to please get your character presentation finished for Aeschylus. and you will also have one due on Monday for Sophocles. We'll see you over the weekend with the next video. Have a wonderful weekend.